to In the Footsteps of Politics, the show which aims to take the broadest view of politics and people's lives. We will talk to some of the most interesting people about how they got to where they are, their successes and their failures. We'll talk to politicians, activists, writers, artists, and anyone with something of value to say. If they want to talk about their personal politics, they're absolutely welcome to, but in general it's a broader conversation, more interest in the intersection of politics and policy and where politics actually matters for the people. I'm Peter Newman, your podcast host. I've been a teacher, a journalist and a political candidate for over 20 years, and now I'm here to welcome you to go in the footsteps of politics. Welcome to In the Footsteps of Politics. My name is Peter Newman. I'm your podcast host. In the Footsteps of Politics is a podcast that takes the broadest view of politics, aims to talk to some of the most interesting people about how they got to where they are and how they achieved their successes and failures. If you want to talk about personal politics, they're absolutely welcome to, but in general, this is about the wider world and where politics and policy can help people. We aim to share ideas which people might find interesting. Today, we have got Charles Beaumont. He formerly worked undercover as an MI6 operative in war zones, on diplomatic missions and in international business. His work spanned 2 decades and 4 continents. His debut novel, A Spy Alone, was published in 2023, and A Spy at War, the sequel, is out on March the 27th in the UK, and I believe is now available for pre-order in the US as well. Charles, welcome to In the Footsteps of Politics.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute honour. As I was just saying to Charles off mic, I have a slightly strange relationship with his first book. I ended up reading it in these weird insomniac bursts. I've actually managed to read this in actual daylight this time, so I'm very pleased about that. Thank you. It's wonderful. I mean, so A Spy at War picks up where the first novel left off, but perhaps you'd like to explain who your characters are and where they are when we open the book.
Sure. So A Spy Alone, and of course it goes without saying, I encourage all listeners to read that first. A Spy Alone describes the central protagonist, Simon Sharman, who is a former intelligence officer working in the private sector. It must be said, not particularly successfully. And he takes up a commission that he's rather relieved to get to investigate a Russian oligarch. And one thing leads to another, and it turns out to be a much bigger thing connected to a sort of spy ring at the heart of the British establishment. So that's the first book. And it ends, I suppose, as many spy stories do, with partial victory and partial defeat, perhaps. And obviously, I'm not going to say any more spoiler territory, but we see our protagonist right at the end of the story, headed to Ukraine in pursuit of someone who has killed one of his colleagues. So the novel starts as what looks like a sort of revenge mission, obviously set in the modern day, so in the current war in Ukraine. But as things unfold, it gets more complicated, and once again, the interplay between sort of global politics and espionage, which is very much where I try to put my writing, is sort of the key to the story. So it's as I say, set in the present day, and very much about the current war in Ukraine, which is obviously continually relevant to what's happening in our everyday lives.
And becoming more so. I think one of the most interesting things about the novel is that it feels to me like you must have had your Nostradamus hat on. There's an awful lot in there which has obviously come true, and I think you're going to get tagged with the Mick Herron thing of perhaps being sort of ahead of where the public were, because I mean there's an awful lot that's very contemporary.
Yeah, I mean almost depressingly so, in the sense that I suppose lots of people who looked at it and looked at what a Trump victory might mean for Ukraine had I think reasonable expectation that Trump was not necessarily particularly sympathetic to the Ukrainians, but the way in which the sort of Russian disinformation machine has dragged the US Republican Party to become what appears to be a pro-Russian political movement. Something for anyone who recalls the Cold War, barely believable. And the impact that is happening on the Ukrainians, both on the battlefield, but obviously in the kind of battle for diplomatic support. Those were things that I wrote about, and to be, as you say, to be clear, I when I was writing, as everyone will know, but books take a while to get edited and printed. So I was writing this last summer, and it feels as if quite a lot of the things that I thought might happen do seem to be happening. And of course, we're speaking on the day that Trump and Putin are going to have their phone call, where they might be sort of dividing up bits of Ukraine, in a sort of Yalta style carve up.
Yes, I've actually just been listening to a podcast called The World with Yalda Hakim and Richard Engels. And Richard Engels was just saying that there is little doubt in his mind that whilst the Ukrainian strike into Kursk was potentially militarily a fantastic sort of tactic, what it's done is it now has allowed that Russian disinformation to be like, well, we need security guarantees as well because we've been invaded, and how we and so that this constant twisting of the narrative has played out, and like you say, it was obvious that the novel was, if you know anything about books, like you say, it's obviously months and months ago that you were writing it. I mean, for anyone that hasn't read the novels, there is a wicked sense of humor that runs through them. It's always, obviously, you're dealing with global politics, and there's lots of very serious stuff, and there's lots of there's enough action as well. But I can't help feeling that there are bits where I read where I just feel like Charles is chuckling in the background. So that there's obviously a former US president whose sympathies with Russia were widely known, had been posting about it obsessively on a far right social media platform, and then you sort of got the tweet style message.
Yeah.
What mattered was not the quality of the prose, but the hundreds of millions who read the post.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you sort of got that side to it, because actually, I don't think it's an accident that Mick Herron obviously is a brilliant writer, but he's, one of the things about his work is that it's incredibly funny, and I think obviously Mick Herron doesn't come from this professional background, but a lot about spying is funny because it's you're always walking a fine line between something which is deadly serious and something which is faintly absurd. People passing themselves off as something else. People effectively, tricking other people sometimes. It's sort of the fine line between practical joke and espionage mission. So finding a way to do that without actually writing a sort of slapstick was something I was keen to try to sort of convey.
Yeah, well, I think you achieve it brilliantly. I mean, the opening line is very there's a sort of Le Carre-esque thing that, a spy alone is the loneliest person in the world, which is the chapter one, which is beautiful. But then, of course, just on the next is and then there were those like Simon traveling alone and avoiding getting into conversations. They would be the spooks, all pretending to be something else. But I also like the diplomat deliberately talking at a high volume to the beautiful producer from Al Jazeera. And I thought, all of these people on the make, kind of these flotsam and jetsam flooding into these war zones for their various purposes.
Yeah, indeed, and there is something about that, and having in my time spent a bit of time in these sorts of environments, that the wars are an opportunity, and I'm not criticizing people because these are people who have legitimate jobs to do, but it's funny how there are certain types that you encounter, whether you're in the Middle East or South Asia or Eastern Europe, diplomats, spies, sort of private security, media. And there is something it feels a little bit like, in fact, I think, I use that phrase as well, a sort of professional networking event that you sort of, it's a bit like a sort of an online LinkedIn, sort of event where you run into people that or you'd like to connect with. And again, this is not to take away from the seriousness of it, but that's just the nature of modern warfare.
And I mean, it seems to me like one of the things that's, people are people, right? So there's going to be incredibly serious, incredibly damaging, but there's also going to be humor and all that, because that's, if you put any scenario in which human beings are involved, they're going to be I did actually want to go back. So one of the things that also happens in the novels is you jump between the time periods. So there's bits where you go back to November sort of 2017.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about that from a sort of political point of view, because social media is now a weapon of war. It was one of those statements that people made to try to appear intelligent, thinking outside the box. Social media is not a weapon of war. It's a bunch of people wasting times on their phone. And so, I mean, Simon is obviously as a character, Simon is another very well-rounded human being, and he makes mistakes and he attributes things. There is a sex scene in it which I just thought was hilarious, because obviously Simon is quite wokey-cokey and is very respectful, and just get on with it.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of affinity with Simon.
Well, we're all, if you can't win any other prize, maybe you can hope for the Bad Sex Award. So
well, I would be devastated, because there's a truthfulness in your thing, I feel. But I just wondered, do you think Simon's attitude, obviously he's a character, but is that representative of where the security services were in sort of 2016, 2017, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly a lot of people didn't take seriously the potential impact of sort of online disinformation. So obviously, in the 2016 election in the US, there were these troll farms, and people will know about the various sort of things that the Russians were trying to do with the Clinton-Trump election. But there's a slight sense that they were pretty unserious. That you'd have people kind of with their location tagged as Moscow, claiming to be voters in Kansas or whatever. Whereas I think now we've reached a stage where we're in a completely different territory, and actually the weaponization of that of a sort of alternative narrative has reached a stage where, as I say, something like the Republican Party, which has historically been at the sort of forefront of the need to contain Russia and to stand up against Russia, now has become a pro-Russian political movement, and it's an amazing achievement of this kind of online world that you can do that, and in that sense, it is a weapon of war, because the power the power impact that has is enormous.
I quite agree, and it strikes me as counterintuitive that it seems to be the right who are more susceptible, but I don't quite know why.
It's a good question. I mean, it may be obviously that as ever we're all in our bubbles, and the thing that you're more susceptible to, or I'm more susceptible, we may not be noticing. But I think what is definitely happening is that there is more activity of this nature pushing the kind of populist right-wing messaging, and I think that's a true statement. So that the degree to which the resources that a country such as Russia, but that not uniquely, a lot of disinformation is being produced organically within America, targeting its own people. But yes, it does seem to be more kind of more resource targeting that side of the political equation, and it's certainly having more success on that side of the political equation. You sometimes hear people say, well, why don't liberals have really good sort of social media? And in the end, I think a populist nationalist message lends itself to that kind of short-term attention span that goes with social media, because it's a politics that is about giving you simple answers, when of course in real life we all know that simple answers rarely work.
See, that was going to be my next question, because I feel that. So I'm a teacher in my day job, and one of the things is they love Trump. I actually was just working with a bunch of first years who were saying, I'm going to put tariffs on you, and I'm going to, I mean, I was roaring with laughter. I thought it was so funny. And then I heard the next one say, I don't know what a tariff is. And I went, yeah, there you go. Right. But my feeling is, and I also feel that this, like the horseshoe theory of politics, where you come right back round, there's a sense in which people on the left can be very smug and very complacent and a little bit patronizing because we feel, well, obviously we're right, but that appeal to simple ideas seems to be very, very appealing to young men.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, I think, obviously you and I probably aren't going to fix the challenges of young men in this discussion, but I think
surely not.
We'd be doing a public service if we do, obviously. But no, I think the other element, and going back to this point about humor, I guess, is that young men are quite often being told, you're not allowed to laugh about this, you're not allowed to laugh about that, and usually that's for a good reason, that you're not there to humiliate people over whom you have some kind of power relationship. But I think the difficulty is that the people on the other side are telling you, yeah, have a laugh, this is great, and oh, here's the answer to the question that no one wants to answer. And so in a way, you have this inequality of arms, that one side has answers and is fun and slightly naughty, and the other side is sort of prim and doesn't really seem to have the answers to any questions, and you can see how that drags people in a certain direction.
I totally agree, and I think that lack of humor is massively important. And I actually saw a thing this morning, on Instagram Reels. There was it was me charging over my woke family to vote reform, and it was a clip from a rugby league match.
Right.
And it's just some guy getting absolutely folded in a rugby league game, and it's set to Royal Britannia, but it's tongue in cheek, it's funny, it's quick, it's got, like you say, that transgressive thing that appeals to young men, or some young men. And I just thought, there just isn't a liberal equivalent to that. You can't do an American footballer absolutely folding somebody on their way to vote for Kamala. It just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
And it is why I find the reform stuff genuinely alarming, because so much of that is disinformation, or online is anyway, even if what they're actually saying in public is more moderate, really.
Yeah, well, I think again, we're in this age where the other thing that seems to be the case is that people's ideas can shift very quickly, probably because of this constant bombardment of information. And so that's another reason that disinformation could be so powerful in this kind of modern era, whereas perhaps it wasn't in earlier times.
Mm-hmm. Something else I picked up I thought was really interesting, because I think this is absolutely true. You have a character saying, what I'm saying is that with my background, you probably see people doing things for ideological reasons rather more easily than if you're British. I think Warren Cameron and those others in the Oxford Environment, because of their beliefs. It's hard for British people to understand because nobody here is remotely interested in grand ideologies. And I think that strikes me as very, very true. We have always, as a culture, shied away from grand narratives, and I think that's also why, as a nation, rejected fascism. You can have P.G. Wodehouse writing sort of spoofs of it. But why this is more what social media doing seems to be fragmenting it and making it more digestible.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I hadn't thought of that, but certainly, I think historically, for reasons that can be positive, but sometimes possibly negative, there is this British cultural aversion to ideologies, and as you say, it's insulated us from extremism. It may have insulated us from other important, interesting ideas, that you can't discuss publicly because everyone thinks you're being a bit of a bore, But but yeah, and it may be then that what people like Andrew Tate have discovered is that social media allows them to sort of take quite big conceptual ideas, and I wouldn't want to sort of dignify him with the concept of an ideology, but he probably does have an ideology, and that's why we can't ignore it.
He's a very, very powerful character. And what is happening is an incredible schism I'm finding between it to an extent male and female, but there are an awful lot of young people who find, again, I think the simplicity and the clarity of the ideas appealing, even if they if you actually ask them, well, are you sure you want to, send women back to the kitchen and all the rest of it?
Yeah.
Because there's quite a lot of women. I've never actually heard of women espousing his theory, but they were then in the next breath. And again, I think slightly more worrying. There's a journalist called Louise Perry, who seems to be single-handedly trying, or not single-handedly, but a small bunch of women, again, who have their own podcast, who are talking about the need to undo the sexual revolution for women.
Right.
And very much harking back, there seems to be this sort of traditionalism going back to the 50s and all of these sort of things. And again, not something that really stands up to a huge amount of analysis if you know any history or know anybody that lived through the 50s, for example. But it's appealing to them. There's a clarity. We knew our roles.
Yeah.
Yeah, muddiness is an unappealing thing. And I mean, I'd be interested in your take. So how much do you think is just greed? I mean, how much in the UK did we fall? I read your piece in Byline Times. I actually had to go through quite a circus to get hold of it, because in the Highlands we don't have many sort of outlets for it. I had actually just listened to that. So just for context, Charles wrote an article in Byline Times called "The Spy Game Has Changed Forever. Its new front lines are politics and finance, not intelligence agencies." And it came off the back of a very long piece about Peter Jukes and Caroline Cadwallader's podcast, Sergei and the Russian Spy Ring, Soviet spy ring it was, which was about the disinformation and the use of money in UK politics. Again, something else that you think should have got a lot more attention, frankly.
Yeah, I think greed is very important. I think that there is something about the world of the sort of neoliberal financialization, where getting money is very important to power, and in ways that perhaps in past years it was less important, because there were other ways to be powerful, perhaps in trade unions or political organizations or government service. There were things like that, and a lot of those routes to influence, and of course influence can be legitimate as much as illegitimate, but a lot of those routes are sort of falling away. Whereas the one thing that hasn't changed is that the very richest in our society appear to be getting richer at an accelerated rate, and so obviously I think the degree to which we don't really seem to want to face this big question. I mean, obviously at the moment there's a lot of debate in UK politics about benefit cuts and whether or not there should be a wealth tax, but it doesn't seem to be a debate that is likely actually to result in major change to how our society works. So yeah, I think greed is a very important factor, and of course once upon a time a lot of espionage was based around ideologies about whether for example you believed that Marxism was a system for the future of the world, and we all know the stories that went with that, Kim Philby, the Cambridge Five, and so on. And I think these days, yes, there are ideologies, and we've just touched on some of those, but they're nothing if they don't come with the opportunity to get very rich. I think that's just a factor that's in there.
Yeah, it's like kleptocracy has replaced Marxism, isn't it? It's quite.
Yes. Yeah.
I was thinking about the acronym or the mnemonic in intelligence. Is it MICE, money, ideology, compromise, ego?
Yes.
And I was just sort of thinking about Trump, because I am actually, despite I'm reluctant to think that he's a Russian, like a conscious Russian asset. I just mainly because I suspect I don't have the imagination for conspiracy theories, whereas the unconscious asset who is sort of spouting Russian propaganda lines, and you think, I was just thinking when you were talking there, perhaps money now just trumps ideology, really, or they've become so intertwined it's difficult to tell the difference.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of both, and of course what's interesting in a way is how for years one looked at America, and most people in Europe might say, well, the capitalist system there is a little bit heartless, and we worry about healthcare and things like that, but we would say that it's a sort of high functioning version capitalism. It's very efficient, it's very competitive, and so on. And what's odd is that one gets a sense that Trump wants America's economy to be more like Russia's, with a small number of fabulously wealthy people whose access to wealth is largely mediated by him, by the president. And that, of course, is the Russian system. And that, wealth is about loyalty. And the more loyal you are to Putin, the more assured you are of keeping your wealth. And I sense increasingly, and this is not to say that Trump's working for the Russians, but just as a worldview, that's one of the reasons he's impressed with Russia, because he thinks that's how America should be.
Yeah, it's very, very, very difficult to disagree with that, isn't it? You just look at it and you just have to say that if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Yeah.
And I have to say I've just been rereading 1984 with a class, and
Right.
It is quite scary, actually. I don't know when you last read it, but I didn't read it for some reason. I missed it at school. I never read it, and then I read it as an undergraduate, and it was fine. To be honest, at the time, Big Brother, the TV show, was on, and Room 101, and my main takeaway from it was, it's like really permeated through popular culture. And then I've taught it a couple of times, but not for about 10 years, and I just reread it in a fury. Really, I just said to the class, "Right, you're reading it. Shut up. You're going to take my medicine." And oh boy, it's quite scary.
Yeah. I mean, funnily enough, I did reread it quite recently. I was somebody who was made to read it at school. No, I got a lot from it, actually, but at the first time around. But yeah, I did reread it, and I was struck by, because in some ways, of course, it's a very different society, because it's a sort of sclerotic communist economy that doesn't really function, and the food's terrible and all that. And that in that sense, America is still a high functioning consumer society, and you can have wonderful meals, and it's certainly better value than eating out in the UK and all that kind of thing. But the way in which something that is a true historic fact can be edited and turned into it can no longer exist. That is something which Orwell predicted that in a way, but according to a set of understandings of what technology might be. Obviously, he didn't know about AI and social media, but he was on to something about how the past could be edited. That actually there wasn't an agreed set of facts that we all worked from when we discuss recent events, and that's obviously the biggest example of that is the insurrectionary behavior on the 9th of January 2020, about which you would think it's only 5 years ago. That's the easiest thing in the world to know what happened. There's live video, as live video you can find online, and yet that is not the case. There isn't an agreed set of facts anymore.
No, and Obama always used to say, "You can. Everyone's welcome to an opinion, but you can't have your own facts."
Yeah,
and how quickly is that?
Yeah,
looked?
Unfortunately, he was wrong. I mean, it's
absolutely.
And obviously, I'm sure people might push back and say, no, you're wrong, Charles. There are facts. It's just that some people don't agree with them. But actually, it's not that simple. In the sense, I'm not saying I agree with the disinformation, but actually, if a significant proportion of the population has in their mind a set of established facts, which every element of their sort of interaction, whether it's Fox News or other sort of media and conversations that they have privately, all reinforces that. Yes. There isn't a single set of facts anymore.
No, I completely agree with that, and I think it's absolutely terrifying, because it does, because it means that those events, they cease to exist. Exactly what you're saying. Yeah. And I'll tell you, the first time I encountered this was, and a lot of it is actually to do with flow of information. And I promise you, this is not a conspiracy theory, but when I was about 18ish, around the turn of the millennium, there was an Israeli hit team who carried out an assassination in Dubai.
Oh yes. Yes, it was, and they were caught on CCTV, weren't they?
They were caught on CCTV, right? And they were carrying, some of them were carrying British diplomatic passports.
Yes.
And of course, it was a big stramash, because you're not supposed to do that, right? You cannot find that story online. There is an Israeli assassination in Dubai in, I think, 2016 or 2006.
Yeah.
that's recorded. But that event, that earlier one, is it's just been buried. Not like I'm not throwing any accusations at all. It is something that has disappeared. So much so that I've actually asked people, going, did that really happen? Did I
Did I
remember?
make this up?
Yeah, and it was on the front of the page. And of course, the other thing, the greatest trick the devil ever played was making you think he doesn't exist. Is you then start? Is that what happens? Is you then start to question your own recollections. Maybe I did make that up. Maybe I did read that in a novel.
Yeah.
And you think, no, it was on the front page of the Times. Like it did happen. I remember it. And it's just, I assume it will still be there if you look far enough down Google's algorithm or whatever. But for whatever, it just has been subsumed by other information. And it then starts making you question, well, maybe that didn't happen.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's quite scary. I'll tell you the other thing that's changed a lot is, Ian McIntosh wrote The Sandbaggers.
Yes.
So we were recently watching his first series, Warship, that he wrote. And there's an episode in there where a sort of junior, he's like a chief petty officer.
Right.
His wife is in enormous debt and she's basically mentally ill and she's spending lots of money. And he is then blackmailed by Russia. Sort of it's early 70s, kind of very height of the Cold War stuff. Over this money, and he's asked to, they catch him because they make him account for all his spending, and she's spending much quicker than he could possibly afford on that thing. Whereas, of course, now as a society, so much is driven by credit and money on the never that show would just not make any sense now.
Yes, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. Yeah, very interesting.
We make ourselves very vulnerable, and we sort of don't really recognize that it's happening. It creeps up on you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so, what do you think? So, using your Nostradamus hat, how does it play out? How do we? Does this Europe rearming? Do we end up with the 1984 3 poles of armed conflict, or where do we? What happens next?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've obviously moved into a chaotic world. Some people are using the phrase multipolar world. That clearly there isn't. There used to be a Western alliance, and then various other. Obviously in the Cold War it was simple. You had two big blocks, and then it got more complicated. But there was always a Western alliance, and it seems that isn't there anymore. Now you might say, well, the Europeans can carry on without the Americans, but I think. It's not as simple as that. Because although Europe on paper has the people, has the economy, has the technology, it just doesn't have the structures. Maybe this will change, but it certainly doesn't at the moment. So I think we're in this messy period where you have overlapping and sometimes contradictory relations, and in a way that's what you're seeing with America, because yes, Trump is proving very, he's been very helpful to the Russians. I mean, maybe stuff will emerge in the next few hours that will contradict that, but it doesn't seem to be. But equally, that just because of that, it doesn't mean that Trump is suddenly on board with, Iran or one of the BRICS, like South Africa, even though Russia, of course, is allied with those. So in a way, what you have is, it seems to me that large countries will have a series of individual relationships that won't necessarily reflect the relationships that others have, and so you have these strange overlaps. Whether this leads ultimately to conflict, to a sort of endless war, I don't know. I mean, I still think the biggest risk there is the USA and China, just because if you have two huge powers and one obviously rising quickly and the other, it looks as though it's descending a bit. There is that chance of
empires fall, Charles. Empires fall.
Yeah, indeed, they do, and some people might be familiar with this concept of the Thucydides trap, which is this idea that you're almost sort of bound to fight. If you're America, you're almost bound to fight China to prevent its rise at some point. Now that a lot of people have attacked that idea because in a way it is a bit reductive. No one's bound to do anything. And funnily enough, there are many criticisms one could level at Trump, but I think it's fair to say that he's definitely keen to avoid major wars. He's happy to drop a few bombs on Yemen or Somalia, but I really don't think he wants to get dragged into a conflict with China. And he loves his deals, so maybe he will do a deal with China. So yeah, I think we're in this chaotic period. We're in a period where relationships between states are very unpredictable and sort of imbalanced. But it's not clear that that means that we are set for sort of major global level conflict. But I certainly wouldn't rule it out, and it certainly feels more likely than it did a few years ago.
Yeah, I can't remember it feeling quite as close, frankly. I suppose 9/11 afterwards, but
yeah, but even then, you didn't. I think we all feared terrorism, and we were right to do so. Obviously, the events of that day were hideous, and there were the London attacks, Madrid attacks. So the terrorism was a serious thing, but it wasn't. You didn't feel it could obliterate our societies. It was never that powerful. Whereas, a major war between two countries, as we've seen in Ukraine, can destroy entire cities, and that could easily be happening in another part of Europe or somewhere else in the world.
Well, I think especially when you look at what Israel's doing in Gaza. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm exceedingly concerned about Israel because they, between the Houthis and Iran and Syria and Gaza, they are lighting a lot of fires, and that's quite a tinderbox to be playing in, lobbing rockets into. I mean, they've flown 1,000 combat missions into Syria since the fall of Assad.
Yeah.
Which strikes me as playing quite a lot of fire.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Oddly, that there seemed to be a window, an unexpected window, with the new the new regime in Damascus, that there could be not an alliance, certainly not. You've got an Islamist revolutionary. He's not going to make an alliance with Israel, but a sort of agreement to leave each other alone.
Yeah.
But it seems that the Israelis don't want that, and what they want is just to have a very sort of high and aggressive level of containment. And clearly, that can have unintended consequences, which we can all speculate.
Yeah, and of course the Balkans is the other one where it's still there's a sort of return to ethno nationalism and all these other kind of pretty terrifying things as well. So
Yeah,
it is quite a scary world at the moment.
yes.
So on a more cheery note, let's do the cheery note first. So I mean, you're not any longer working on this. You're now writing full time, I am assuming.
Yeah.
How has that transition been from out of the intelligence services into being a writer?
Well, it wasn't immediate. So I think I've sort of said elsewhere that I was out doing other things for some time. But yes, I mean, ultimately, being able to write as your main job is an amazing privilege. I'm very lucky. The first novel, did well, and so that's given me the ability to sort of carry on doing this. But it's an extraordinary thing. Of course, when you only got one novel out, you don't know how the second one will land. So we'll just have to see how it works out.
Second album syndrome. It'll be fine. It'll
definitely.
be fine. It's very. I'm not blowing smoke. It is a fantastic novel. I'd see no reason why people who like the first one won't adore the second one.
Well, that's very heartening. Thank you.
No, I really mean it, and the pace is excellent. I'm actually, sometimes you read novels by people who have worked in the intelligence community, and you think, yeah, they got commissioned because of their background. They're a great biography. And I was just wondering, did you always want to be a writer? Was that a long-standing ambition for you?
I think I wouldn't say it was an ambition, because in a way I didn't think it was possible. But then, of course, a lot of people never had the ambition to be an intelligence officer because they didn't think that was possible. So the way it worked for me was I'd always thought I'd like to have written a novel. And of course, lots of people have that as a life ambition. And probably, like lots of other people, I was also COVID was that opportunity, in the sense of sort of enforced inactivity. I thought, well, I better give this thing a go now. because it's now or never, and then, but like lots of people, it wasn't straightforward getting an agent, getting a publisher. All those things take time, and you get lots of no's before you get a yes. So yeah, there was nothing sort of inevitable about ending up where I have.
But I mean, I asked that really because the quality of the prose. It's clearly somebody that I get the impression you must have read an awful lot, and you write very, very well. You write like a writer. You don't write like somebody who is, as I say, haven't been signed because of their background. Although I'm sure it didn't hurt.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of you. I mean, I've read loads in my life, and I've read. I wouldn't have said that I was one of those people that was particularly a reader of espionage fiction. I have read loads of it, but I've read just as many other books, and whether it's classic literature or just a modern sort of literary fiction or whatever. So I suppose that's been helpful to me, that I've had loads of different influences, and I consume a lot of news media, as you might imagine, because I'm pretty obsessed with sort of what's going on in the world, and the good stuff in places like the New Yorker, or some of the longer articles in the Economist. They are literary works of their own, I would say.
Yeah, some of the writing. I love the Economist. I think it's a very, very well written publication. I did actually. It did make me chuckle because when I was thinking about that, there's a scene in a Charles Cummings novel where he flashes back to the training centre. I think it's down in Hampshire, and he's like, they had a trainee and he was already drafting up the outline of his novel while he's training, because he's only there to so he can say that he was recruited, which again I think was a little sort of self-deprecating thing from Charles's thing, because there's a bit in his biography where it's like they tried to recruit him but he wasn't.
Yes, I think I think his very first novel, but I love his books. I think his very first novel has a sort of vignette right at the beginning of a recruitment that doesn't is not consummated, as it were, and then and then obviously, so that's probably a sort of slightly clever in joke there.
He's very, very good. I think Trinity 6 is one of the
particularly good, isn't it? Yeah,
just a fantastic novel, and obviously has sort of echoes here with the with the Cambridge spy ring, which is obviously referenced a bit in your novels as well. Do you have a writing routine at the moment?
No, I mean, I tend to be fairly disorganized about it, really. I mean, for me, the main thing is you've got to sort of bang out a certain number of words every day, and because it's that classic thing, and I certainly felt it when I first started trying to write novels, that the prospect of writing 100,000 words just seems unbelievable. How would anyone ever do that? But if you break it down and you manage 1,000 words a day, and actually, obviously, it doesn't mean then you write it in 100 days, because obviously you're doing other things, and there's editing, and there's redrafting. But at that point, at least this thing starts to grow, and after a while, you've got a few chapters, and you start to think, oh, this will happen. This isn't some crazy idea. I think the other thing is because there are the writers who are big planners, as in they plan their whole books out, and there are those who are more sort of seat of pants, I guess, and I'm definitely in the second category.
That's good to know. Again, I think that makes the editing more important, doesn't it? When you're that's really interesting. And so, are you? What does the future hold? Are there more in this series, or have you?
Yeah, in this series, there's definitely a third book, and at this stage, I believe that's where the story will finish. But I mean, at this stage, it's hard to know. And there are, and I've really, obviously, I've really enjoyed creating these characters, and I've obviously even more enjoyed the fact that people like them and people that have become invested in them. But there are loads of other settings and potential protagonists and potential stories that I'd be quite interested to explore. So I'm not sure that I want to sort of write 9 novels about these people or whatever. And I'm always impressed when, I mean, John le Carré, of course, is the master in this space, and him creating, such a engaging and sort of all-encompassing world around sort of George Smiley and the circus. And of course, he wrote lots of other books that weren't in that world, but a lot of his best ones are. So maybe not that I'm comparing myself in quality, but just these are people I can come back to as well in sort of later on.
Well, one of the things it's funny you mentioned John le Carré there. One of the things it sent me back to was Our Game,
Yes.
this novel, because I don't think until I was an undergrad when I read Our Game, and I don't think I'd heard of Chechnya, until and I. So again, that's one of those, I like novels where you end up learning stuff as well, and I felt the same thing with The Spy at War, because I hadn't heard of that Chechen warlord who was on Instagram.
Oh yes,
that you mentioned.
Kadyrov, yes.
And I so I was sitting there thinking, that sounds like it might be a real person. I was giggling.
Yeah.
Oh God, it is a real person.
Yes.
And I was looking at his sort of gaudy palace, and I was like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, it's sort of he's kind of the central casting kind of bad guy, and yet he is a real person. Yes, Our Game. One of my favorite of his later novels, of le Carré's later novels, and partly again, I think I'm with you, but that it gives you an insight into these really complex sort of societies that exist, particularly in the sort of Caucasus region, North Caucasus region of Russia, and yes, in the to a certain degree, I suppose. That there's a bit of influence of that in my work in the character. There's not to give too much away, but there's an important Chechen character that runs through the whole story.
An exceedingly important Chechen character, but one who, I mean, you've got the whole the thing that was triggering it, as well as just the Chechen, was this. You're very good on the crucial importance of Bakhmut and all of these, like the way that Ukraine is actually, what the battle has actually done, what the war has actually done to that country. And I can tell you, I was working with a young lady who is a Ukrainian, and she is obviously a refugee, and I showed her, and that opening chapter, which is obviously so the novel opens with the start of the war. I don't think we're giving away too many spoilers.
No.
And she was really quite sort of rocked back in her heels by how good it was.
Oh well, that's incredibly heartening. I mean, I've spent time in Ukraine since the war, since the 22 invasion. So I'm not going to pretend I've been near the front lines, but I certainly Kyiv and the atmosphere there and the sense of it. I think it was important to me that people felt like it was real.
Well, it was good enough for a Ukrainian to say it felt like home, so that was good. She was very, very taken with it, and she's a very bright young lady who, so she's worth listening to.
Great.
I'd say the other bit that I thought was maybe you having a bit of fun was the ambassador. The modern embassy as a platform.
Yes. Yes. I'm sure there'll be some people in the Foreign Office who find that a bit annoying, but let's just say it's possible I've met people like that.
I'm sure. No, heaven forbid. Surely not. Entirely drawn from your imagination. Do you find any parallels between your former profession and now the writing, or being a writer?
I think so. I mean, I think the reason. Well, there are probably plenty of reasons, but one of the reasons that quite a few people who've worked in the intelligence services end up having some success at writing is that the main activity of human intelligence is understanding people. It's getting inside their heads. It's understanding their motivations. It's understanding their characters. Maybe understanding people with whom you profoundly disagree, or even you feel that you're completely opposed to, and they're basically your enemies, but you still have to understand them. And obviously I think that's basically what writers have to do. You've got to create characters, and if a book's going to be any good, even the unsympathetic characters have to be believable. They have to have motivations that make sense. They're not just purely evil or purely greedy or whatever. There has to be more to it. So I think that there is some overlap there.
Well, that's really fascinating. So what's next in your immediate stream?
Well, the third novel in the series is as it were in production, and it will continue the story that is told in A Spy at War, but there will be an element of a sort of flashback that takes us back to the beginning, both of Simon's career when he was a young intelligence officer, which is, it's hinted at in the first two books, but actually we don't get that much about it. So we're going to go back there, but it's also that coincides with the beginning of Vladimir Putin's time as president of Russia. And in a way, if there's a person, an individual who has ended up, whether we like it or not, being a sort of colossus bestriding this era, I think you have to argue that it's him, the last quarter century, a really, really consequential figure.
Yeah, it would be difficult to deny him that, to be fair, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Just a quick question: how does promoting the books work? You obviously have to be very careful about your identity because of your previous thing. I don't know whether the UK has a vetting committee the way that David McCloskey, for example, has to put his novels through the CIA.
No, in the UK system is you might be shocked to learn slightly more ad hoc.
Surely not.
But certainly, I make sure that there are no issues with the book before it goes out. And yeah, I'm not. I do not publicly sort of acknowledge my. There's no secret. I'm writing in a pen name, and my actual name is not for public disclosure. And that's the way it is. I think it's easier to promote a book if you were in the CIA. But there we go. That's we live in the world we live in.
And but how do you? So can you just not do public events? I mean, obviously it's fine here. We can turn the camera off and we can.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah, no, I mean, not in the conventional sense. I don't think I can. No. So that's that's a bit unfortunate, but I suppose. I mean, you could be sort of mercenary and say, well, most books aren't sold at public events; they're sold probably on Amazon or whatever. But in a way, I respect the rules and I respect the reason that they're there. And sometimes I'm actually a bit surprised how much former CIA officers are allowed to say publicly. So I obviously it would be directly beneficial to me if the rules were a lot looser over on this side of the pond. But I can understand why they exist.
Well, I mean, like I say, as long as the books are selling, it's fine, isn't it? Really.
That's right.
Are you going to? Did I hear there was rumor of a TV adaptation?
Yeah, that is more than the rumor. So that an option has been taken up by a production company, Pod Productions. In fact, it was based in Scotland, and it's a company that they've done quite a few successful shows, including most recently something called Criminal Record, which was on Apple TV. Which did very well with Peter Capaldi.
I watched it. Yes.
Well, there you go. So you'll know their work, and Peter Capaldi in the lead role, and yeah, so they're a very brilliant outfit, and they're taking it forward. Of course, as anyone who's published a book will be able to tell you, selling an option and getting something onto screen.
Seeing it on the screen. Yeah.
There's quite a few steps between the two. So it would be wonderful if it happens, but you've got to be realistic. It may never happen.
Well, let's keep fingers crossed because I think it's exceedingly cinematic.
No.
So, final question is: what is the question you wish people would ask you but they never do?
Oh, I should have thought of that in advance.
I mean, yeah. I know I called you Nostradamus, but that would be a little.
Yes. What was the question? I think the question I don't think I am ever asked is about the books that have nothing to do with spying that somehow illuminate this world, and in that way, I'm thinking of the kind of novel where you really don't know whether the narrator is leveling with you or not. I think that's very like a lot of espionage work where you spend your time sort of really not understanding exactly who's around you and sort of what your motivations are and that sort of thing. So I'm thinking of people like Umberto Eco, author of The Name of the Rose and Foucault's Pendulum, fabulous writer. And I think there's a lot to learn about the world of intelligence, which doesn't involve books about spies.
How interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense because, of course, human nature more than anything else. Well, that's wonderful. Where is the best place online for people to find your work? We'll put the purchase links for the novels in the show notes. But where's the best place for people to find you online?
Partly because of all the other things. Yes, I don't have a huge presence, but I'm on X, although fully aware of the way that's slightly gone downhill a bit. I'm also on Blue Sky, which is a slightly more kind of friendly place these days. The Spybury group on Facebook I think is wonderful, and I know a lot of people that I've been lucky enough to interact with are involved with that. And of course, as anyone would say, I'm very happy if you buy my books, but if you buy them from your local bookshop, support your local independent bookshop, that's even better.
That's it. In all good bookshops and terrible ones too. We don't care as long as it's
indeed.
An independent.
And even the ones
I like bookshop.org where you can donate the money.
You can nominate, and that's a great, and certainly those sorts of things where you're able to direct your support in a certain way is brilliant, and
certainly is. I'm going to put in a nod to Spybury as well. That is a fantastic podcast and basically the friendliest place on the internet. It's
genuine, warm-hearted enthusiasts whose only purpose is to share things that they've enjoyed and discuss things in a really, really kind of positive way. And it's a reminder that people go on about how toxic the online world is, and that's certainly true. But actually, there's still lots of communities of lovely people, and this is one of them.
There really are. So Shane is controller over there, and he does a fantastic job. And works incredibly hard. Charles, thank you ever so much for coming on in the Footsteps of Politics. I'm really honoured to have you as the first guest on the revamp. And you didn't even have to walk down the A82 with massive thundering fish lorries going past you while you were doing it. So.
Well, I feel I've missed out there. But anyway, thank you very much for the invitation. It was a great pleasure.
That's right. Best of luck with the book. Take care.
Thanks.
That's all we have time for this week. Thank you for listening to In the Footsteps of Politics. You can email the show, footstepsofpolitics@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook by searching for Footsteps of Politics. If you've enjoyed the programme, please rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your pods, and you can find us on YouTube as well. In the Footsteps of Politics was written, hosted and produced by me, Peter Newman, and the music was Joyful Footsteps by Ukrainian producer Diamond Tunes, who you can find the links to in the show notes. Have a lovely week. We'll see you next time when we go In the Footsteps of Politics. And remember, politics is decided by those who show up.